Hi everyone, my name is Brian Mattias, and I'm a concept designer in the film and game industries. For today's Imagine Effects workshop, I wanted to share with you my design process for creating a keyframe story image using dramatic lighting. With that being said, I thought it'd be interesting for this particular assignment and workshop to do an assignment that would involve story. Because let's just, I guess, pretend in this case, if we're going to be treating this as a professional assignment, that a production designer is working on a film that needs to be greenlit and has assigned me to do an image that will convey a certain moment in time in this film. So I did a little bit of story work before actually starting this image, and I thought it'd be really cool to do a image with a pilot and some sort of vehicle in space. From there, I developed just a really short little bit of story involving. So what I wrote was maybe this is on a different planet, and it involves an elite squadron of fighter pilots that are the guardians of this planet from its hostile skies, whatever that is. Use your imagination. But this particular moment in time, it needs to be developed to get buy-off from a studio. So it needs to be dramatic. It needs to really captivate the viewer. So from there, I wanted to first do a compositional sketch. So let me just pull that up. And let me also just mention that when I was assigned this video, I actually got a little bit of work in before recording the actual painting process. So a lot of the initial development I already had done. So this was my compositional sketch. So with this image, I wanted to pretty much just lock in the composition and the value structure, keeping it really loose and just kind of greeking in just the kind of general design I wanted to have for the ship, and not really the fighter pilot. He's just kind of a silhouette generic guy at this point. But the green grid lines, so I had two different grid lines that I used to develop this composition. This is the rule of quadrants. It's a very common sort of film framing grid that is used in a lot of different, but by a lot of different filmmakers. I recently saw, if you just Google the rule of quadrants, Drive, the movie Drive, it's really great. It breaks down how Nicholas Winding Refn, the director, wanted to tell visual stories using these different sections of the film frame. And it's pretty remarkable how he can tell different stories almost in tandem, actually quite often in tandem, within these quadrants. Sometimes the upper half, the bottom half, upper left, bottom right. It's pretty useful tool. So for this in particular, it was used to stage the ship. I wanted the ship to be kind of center stage, just as much the hero as the pilot, really. And for the pilot, I used the rule of thirds and had him oriented pretty much on the right third of the screen, pretty much right at the crosshairs of the upper right quadrant. Let me pull that up as well. Yeah. So yeah, with that, I also kind of just drew a little circle because this is where I wanted my eye to go. This is where the focus is. It'll have the most contrast. It'll have probably a little bump in light. That's why there's a moon or a sun behind him, because that'll create an intense sort of bloom around his head that will create a nice dramatic focus, even if it isn't a lot of detail, which it probably won't be. A lot of sunsets, which this image will be a sunset. I don't think I mentioned that. Dramatic lighting. Imagine Effects, when they contacted me, they really wanted me to do a sunset image, and I thought that was really cool. I love sunsets. They're very dramatic. So yeah, this is a great opportunity to use color and value structure because there isn't a lot of details and noise that's picked up in sunset environments. And with that being said, the next step I did was get a lot of reference, which I can't show you just because a lot of photographs are copyrighted. So from there, I did steal a lot of colors from said photographs because there isn't any patents on color palettes. And I tend to do this a lot actually with my images. I'll break down color swatches for whether it's costume designs or even for environments like this. I'll try and get a loose understanding of what I want my palette to be before I start designing and painting. So for this palette, I broke it down into the kind of ambient environment, lights and darks, and then the objects. So the objects in this case would be the ship and the character, and the lights will be the environment. So generally, yeah, the light spectrum being around, in the sky, around the sun, into the darks, which will be in the shadows. And from that, I did a color sketch. And for this color sketch, I pretty much just used, at first, I did a color layer over the black and white, but more so to get that burn, get that heat and intensity, I used some of the layer effects like linear light. I actually have a linear light layer still turned on. Linear light's really interesting. It doesn't make much sense here, but if I turn everything else off, if you see the local color of that layer, it's this kind of nice burgundy purple. And when it reacts, how linear light works is it reacts with what's underneath, but it also preserves a lot of the local value and color of the layer that you're actually painting. So it acts as almost a glazing. It's a glazing technique. You can glaze in lights, you can glaze in darks in this case. So I use that a lot because you can get some nice intense saturation in both your darks and lights. So I use that a little bit with a nice soft airbrush for this color sketch. So once that was approved, I'd send it over to the editor, and in this case we'll pretend he's the production designer getting buy-off for this moment in the story. And the feedback was that there needed to be a little more connection with the viewer. So the character, we wanted to have him make eye contact in this case, with the viewer. So that's where I'm going to develop it later on, because I thought that was great. This particular moment in time, this pilot is kind of like the Lone Ranger. At least that's what I was thinking, that he's, near his steed, in this case the ship, and he's about to ride off into the sunset. So just for one little added ingredient, it'd be great if he's looking at the viewer almost like he's bidding the viewer farewell before riding off. And yeah, so got the thumbs up for that, and that's when I started using SketchUp. I use SketchUp a lot sometimes for just when I want to work efficiently. I want to set up the image with a camera lens in SketchUp. SketchUp's great. It's really user-friendly, and although I'm not going to be focusing on SketchUp in this tutorial, it's great. Just go on YouTube and you can find videos on how to use it. It's super user-friendly, and it's great. It's great because you can set up images. You can put a camera in there with different focal lenses. You can light it, but the lighting is very archaic. I kind of like it because it's very graphic, and it's great for selection layers, which I tend to use. I'll show you that later when I start painting. And this is the general structure of what the foundation of what I'm going to paint on top of. And so yeah, let's get started with the painting. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm pulling up my SketchUp model, and I'm turning off the layers that I'm not going to paint directly on top of right now. So I'm renaming the ship. I'm getting rid of the ship and starting on the background. And why I like to start with the background is it's kind of a reverse process. Since I've already done the composition and a lighting study, just for organization purposes, I like to work from back to front. It keeps everything clean and organized for me. And it also is good for just the ambience, the general ambience of the painting, just getting the background in place at the beginning. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually adding a lighten layer to a color overlay of the gray model. And what's nice about the lighten layer is because a lot of the darks, when you add a color layer, they're usually just, I mean, it's monochromatic. So if, like in this case, the orange reacting to the dark, it becomes a little too brown. And because I know there's going to be a lot of burn through and shadows, the closer, or actually I should say the farther away, the more saturated and lighter they will become. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just tweaking a lot of the shadows, lightening and saturating them within the selection layer. And to achieve a lot of these colors, I should mention that I'm constantly referring to my color palette that I made as well as the color sketch. So what I'm thinking right now, like, is just trying to get the general values right, trying to pretty much disguise the 3D low poly model that the background is. So now that the background is somewhat situated, the values and the colors are in place, now I'm working on the model, which is the set piece. So I exported a couple of different layers of this model. In SketchUp, it's great. You can light your models, you can light your scenes, depending on the time of day. So I exported a 3 or 4, maybe not that many, I'm not really sure, but I exported a couple of different models with lighting situations, and I layered them all on top of one another. So what I'm doing here is I created a layer mask. You can find that in the layer palette at the bottom. It looks like a square with a little circle in the middle. If you click on that while you're on a selected layer, it'll open up another window right next to the layer. So it looks like a window with like a little chain, which means it's linked to the layer. And what's great using this is it's a mask. So with black and white turned on in your background and foreground color, as you can see on the palette on the side I just clicked on, I'm constantly switching between black and white. And what that means is what I'm erasing and painting in on that layer mask. And what's great about this is I like to set up all my hotkeys pretty close to the command or control key. So I have my brush up and down set to Z and X. It's just right above it. I use that quite a bit, and I tried to do it really quickly, where trying to go all the way over to the brackets, which is the default hotkey for brush up and down, it doesn't feel very natural to me, so I reassigned them closer to the command key. And also the foreground background color, I have that selected as A, and that toggles between the foreground background color. So the layer mask in this case, I can go between black and white quite easily that way. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm toggling through the layer attributes, and I decided on hard light layer, which is what you're seeing here. And hard light's great. It's a lot like linear light, like I mentioned before, but instead of keeping a pretty high key saturation like linear light does, it's a little more general, which is great. And what I'm doing here, because it's a little high contrast, is I'm using a darken layer to create kind of a gradient. So I used a gradient within the selection layer, and I'm hitting it with darken. And what I like to do, you'll see a window coming up. I know this is high speed. This is set up about 4 times the speed of what I was painting. What I like to do a lot is if you double click on a layer, it'll open up pretty much the layer menu And you'll see sliders at the bottom, and you can slide them around. They range from black and white, which is dark and light on the spectrum. And if you move those sliders, you can expose a lot of the darks and lights depending on which sliders you're moving in the layer below. And what's great about that is you can preserve a lot what's underneath if it's too general in the layer that you're using. So like for an example, that darken layer that I put on, I wanted to expose a little bit more of the light, especially on that plane. There's that plane right near the cockpit that was a little too dark before. So I moved that slider over to expose it and get a little bit of that highlight in there. And right now I'm just refining the silhouette. I'm making it a little bit more believable by adding in the landing gear essentially. So this is the landing gear. I didn't have that modeled in. It would have taken too much time, and since it's such a little component, it would have just been easier to paint it. So that's what I'm doing here. It's pretty much just a silhouette, and I'm using a pattern brush to add in a little bit of a ribbing, just like kind of a hydraulic sort of shielding on those landing gears. I use selections quite a bit just to keep everything clean. I toggle depending between the magnetic lasso tool and just the basic lasso tool. But for this, for hard surface objects, it's easier to just use the magnetic lasso tool. Now I'm just adding covers for the landing gear. Thinking just like a real world plane, when they aren't exposed, they fold right up into the hull of the ship. So I'm just adding those just to add a little bit more to the design. Right now I'm just kind of looking over the model. I actually, that was Smart Blur, that menu that just came up. Smart Blur is great, especially if you're using photos or a model that you have a weird rasterization. Smart Blur will keep hard edges where the contrast is the greatest, but when it falls into shadow or in general highlights, it'll blur all the information. So instead of getting that sort of JPEG rasterization, it'll blend it together. It'll make it look a little more painterly. But what it doesn't do is it does not affect the overall silhouette of the layer. So what I'm doing right now is I'm cleaning it up. It's noticeably JPEG-y. It was quite rasterized, so I'm trying to just clean up. I'm pretty much just erasing out and painting in some areas the general silhouette. There might be an easier way to actually clean up rasterization, but I find if I just do it with paint and try not to take too much time, it still preserves that sort of illustration quality to the image, which I think that's also why I like SketchUp a little bit, because SketchUp still keeps even the shadows graphic. Everything's pretty graphic. So not only is it great to select into, it's easy to manipulate with paint strokes. And I think my aesthetic, although it's very graphic, I really like things graphic. It's also good if you're a very painterly painter. So yeah, try it out. It's really easy, like I mentioned. It's really easy to pick up. You can learn tutorials on YouTube. It's a great tool. A lot of artists in the film industry, they've adopted 3D and have worked with 3D, whether it's Modo or Maya or ZBrush or SketchUp in this case. They're all great programs and they all serve different purposes. Um, but definitely for an introduction to 3D, I definitely recommend SketchUp. It's great. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm cleaning up a little bit of the geometry and adding some accents to the ship design. Yeah, some of the geometry that was originally on the model, I've always intended to change. I just kind of wanted to block out like certain things, like um, the intercooler in the rear, and the jet engines, like keeping some of that information in there, and also like the design of this thing is pretty classic. Like I've always been uh, a big fan of the 70s, 80s sci-fi. So I definitely wanted to keep this design very classic in that aesthetic. Okay, pulling back the color comp I did, keying the shadows a little bit darker, and now selecting in the lights, just airbrushing in a little bit to keep that silhouette pretty strong, and receding some things back by adding a little bit of shadow towards the cockpit, keeping that little that highlight and contrast at that corner of the rear of the ship. Okay, so now I'm using a SketchUp character just pretty much just as a point of reference, since he's sitting in the environment pretty well, and pretty much changing him up. I'm going to key this character pose by falling back on the story. Since the story involves him being, like I said, the Lone Ranger about to ride off into the sunset, I wanted to give him sort of a calm, sort of confident pose. I also wanted him to also be giving a little bit of eye contact with the viewer, so that you know he's the hero. It's a very heroic sort of stance, but at the same time, it's not over posturing, so that it feels pretty natural. So yeah, I'm moving the arm back. I wanted to have him holding a helmet. I wasn't sure at first if he would be wearing the helmet or not, but I thought it would be a little more effective for the story if he's holding his helmet before even putting it on and getting in the ship. It just adds a little bit more story, makes it a little more interesting and intriguing, really, because with the lighting situation being so high contrast and so silhouetted, there will be an inherent mystery to this character. There won't be a lot of detail in his face. Actually, based on the color comp, there's going to be quite a bit of bloom around his head, since I'm staging the sun almost like a halo around his head, just to keep that the focus. But yeah, sometimes detail isn't necessary. It's the overall impact of the image that's the most important. Always remember that, and especially when you're designing, just remember that the silhouette and the shape reads are the most important. And designing anything, whether it's a costume, a character, a ship, some sort of vehicle, or an environment, your shape language is the most important thing. If you just think of any iconic character that's been created, what makes them so iconic, and what makes their design strong. Just think about putting any character that is memorable. If you put that character on a hilltop in the distance, it'll probably still read. You'll probably know who that character is if there's a sun behind him in the distance. Like it's that sort of thing you should always think about when designing anything. But key off of characters, definitely with character silhouettes, it's great to think about. And a good way when designing to achieve that effect is to constantly be working big and small within your frame of reference. You'll notice that a lot of times while painting this image, even my frame of reference is pretty small. You can see my desktop because I'm concerned with the big reads. I want the image to hold up at a thumbnail, or I want it to hold up if it's blown up big on even a projector or something. But yeah, the thumbnail, the silhouette, it's really important. Just think about online, like if your art is among other art, or even if you think about it on Facebook, for example, what's going to make people click on your image? What's going to make people click and blow it up to see what it's about? It'll be the silhouette of that thumbnail. So yeah, actually, it's funny. I spend I spend the most amount of time with my shape language and silhouettes. Sometimes too much time exploring different shapes. A lot of times in a lot of my different designs, I'll have like 5 or 6 designs in one image that I've erased or painted over or modified just because I want to play around with trying to achieve some sort of iconography in the image. Okay, yeah, he's starting to get there. His value structure is looking pretty strong. He's looking at the viewer. 3/4. I wanted to keep it still not like 100% confrontational, just enough that he's like about to turn away. He's about to go off. It's just right at that moment where he's about to walk away. Maybe it's his girlfriend. Maybe it's his wife. Maybe it's his boyfriend. You never know. Like he's or whoever. It's someone that maybe he cares about, and he's going to ride off. And you might not ever see this guy again. Who knows? But no, he's the hero. All right, yeah. Now I'm putting the sun in there. Trying to stage it just so that I'm trying to keep the rule of thirds pretty consistent in this image. So he's placed on the right third of the screen. Even the sun is kind of a 2/3, 1/3 in terms of the orientation behind the character. Okay, so now that I have the sun in there, that's really informing me a lot about the lighting situation and the lighting setup. So now I'm keying in some more specific lighting. Still general, still kind of hazy, but definitely keying off of where the position of the sun is now that it's in the image. All right, so this is actually a helmet that I designed a while ago. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to just take that as a foundation, just to, save some time and change it, paint over it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking this helmet and I'm going to make it a different helmet. Yeah, don't be afraid to reuse. If there's something that you've done before, if it's appropriate for your image, don't be afraid to reuse it and change it and put it in your image. So yeah, I'm thinking that this will be a closed. The helmet will be a closed face helmet, so it won't be like a Vespa or a or like a skateboard helmet or something like that. It'll be kind of motorcycle-ish, but the helmet will conceal the entire face. Yeah, playing with the silhouette again with this. funny thing about helmets, a lot of artists actually draw them a little bit too small. It makes sense because if you are if you're making a character that's wearing a helmet, you're not going to want to make it look too big because it'll throw off the proportions and the character just won't look as heroic. But in reality, helmets are pretty large, especially if they're a helmet like this, that's designed to not just encapsulate the head, but cushion and protect the head. So helmets are generally pretty large objects. So if you have a 7.5 head lengths tall character, it'll be more like 6 head lengths with a helmet on. Yeah, trying to figure out that nose bridge and how it attaches to the visor. It's looking sort of like a motorcycle, helicopter pilot helmet. I'm not looking at any reference when designing this, but generally I try and use actually reference as much as I can for any design, even if it's some outlandish like sci-fi thing. I'm always constantly looking at nature or looking at things that exist in reality as a point of origin. It just makes your design stronger in the end. Just adding some rivets and some circles, so some subtle modeling to try and break up that sort of spherical helmet shape. And also just for contrast, it's nice to add a couple little details. Helmets are great for incorporating the dominant, subdominant, subordinate model, which is it's a basic design tool of arranging your small, medium, and large shapes. The rule of thirds fits in there, and then with that sort of structure, it's good to create focus and create better designs. If you're thinking of what's the large read, how are the subdominant forms fitting within that or accompanying that, and the final accent shape and how that's used for the general design, because sometimes the accent could be a focal point, sometimes it could be just like a subtle payoff at the end, especially in story images where you don't want the viewer to recognize something at first. It's good to have a little bit of an accent in there if it's a story element. You can key a little bit of color on something to get the eye to go there last, just as your last little visual payoff. It's a great model to think about when designing an image. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get the helmet to fit in the space. I'm thinking that the local color of the helmet's probably on the cooler spectrum, a lighter value, like maybe a white or a light blue helmet. So it's definitely keying off more of the yellow rather than the orange and reds in the environment. It's nice just to differentiate it from the rest of the character, which is that reddish orange color. Just enough, because I mean it's mostly him and the helmet are in silhouette because they're in the foreground. Out of all the objects, he's in the foreground, closest to the viewer. So I think it would be pretty cool if it looked like he has been wearing this helmet. Maybe maybe he's been out there already, and he has some helmet hair. Definitely I was looking at reference of hair that was sweaty, or even tried to look up reference for helmet hair. Sweaty hair I thought would be a great little detail to add in this environment, since everything's really hot. It's a hot palette, that maybe this planet is quite hot in temperature. It's maybe a very tropical type of climate, very humid. Um, so yeah, definitely playing off of that, giving of uh, a little bit of story to the character. Um, he's definitely not all clean and just came right out of the shower. Well, maybe, I don't know, his hair's wet, but um, yeah. So yeah, definitely cleaning up the forms. Trying to, get the hair shape and the side of the head, the jaw feeling correct. Um, but yeah, at this point, I'm definitely starting to build up some of the details and in the character. And although it's really low contrast, all the changes in form, hopefully that subtlety will come through in the final. Another thing to note, there's one shape or a brush, I should say, that you'll see that I use quite often. It's a brush that I made myself. It's a rectangular brush that acts as a marker, like almost like a Prismacolor marker. Um, I set it to no opacity jitter, like a flow jitter. Sometimes I do, depending, which just makes the edges kind of translucent. Not like an opacity jitter, but it's kind of nice. It gives it sort of a marker quality. But I go between that and then just the hard chisel marker, and I have that set on direction. So what that does is that I designed it as a vertical rectangle with rounded edges, and with direction turned on, the longest side is the side that is the direction of the brush stroke. So it's a thick sort of direction. But you can also set it on initial direction, which means that as you turn, like if you do a curve or something, as you turn it, it goes in between thick and thin, which depending on the size of your brush, it'll vary between the widest and narrowest sides of the brush, which is cool for certain things. But I tend to use direction just because it's better for kind of chiseling out shapes. Yeah, it's kind of funny actually. The three go-to brushes that I always use are airbrush, that chisel marker, and the generic round circle brush. Um, the brushes I use are quite simple. Um, I don't tend to use a lot of painterly brushes or pattern brushes. Sometimes I do, but I tend to keep my brushes simple and just focus on shape. Um, but I do like this one airbrush. I have two different types of airbrush. I have the generic airbrush that's the default round airbrush, which is soft. But I have this other one that's a really fine spray. And I'm going to include it so that you guys can have it. I really like it. It's like almost like a splatter airbrush. Gives it kind of a grainy sort of quality, which is nice. Just to like add some particles to the environment. And in this case, like a little bit of moisture to this environment is something that could be nice. So I'm designing out his little backpack here. Maybe it's some sort of oxygen assist. Maybe at some of the high speeds that he's flying, it's good to keep some pressurized oxygen in a tank on his back. Although if he gets shot, he's going to explode. So maybe it's not the best idea. But it just has a nice silhouette. Keeping it really simple too. It's very geometric and really boxy. I think I was pulling up reference there. I think I looked at an air conditioner or something for his backpack. um, yeah, but didn't add any vents or anything. So you'll notice when I'm working, how I'm working this way, I'm still the majority of the time I spend on my illustrations and concepts. I tend to focus the most on my shape language. The very end is when I add. I render a little bit. Usually, if I'm going to render, I pick an area to render. I don't find it very necessary to render everything in an image. It's kind of nice, especially if you're working in film, to try and paint in. You don't have to go photo real, but it is nice that if you treat your paintings as if you're looking through the lens of a camera, and when you shoot photography, there is always a point that is a point of focus, a point of detail, and sometimes it's more extreme than others. Everything can be blurred out, and then you can focus on just one point within a composition. It's a similar sort of effect in terms of rendering detail. Just pick an area that you want your eye to focus on and put your detail there. It won't, not only will it make your image stronger, it'll save you time, and a lot of times when I see artwork that's rendered throughout the composition, corner to corner, it's a little bit of a headache, at least for me. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at, or I don't find that there's a place for my eye to rest. And also just looks like it was kind of painful to work on sometimes. So yeah, it's good to just keep it to one area, and just try it out when you're like working loose, or if you have something that's like kind of graphic, just to key one area a little bit more than the rest of the image, and you'll find that it might make it stronger. Just working a little bit of wrinkles on his arm. Just designing like a little cord that maybe is to some sort of communication pack on his chest, or some sort of life support readout. That's connected to the backpack. You can see the cord kind of going underneath his bicep there. Really subtle, but it just kind of breaks up the form and creates a little bit of interplay between the background and his torso. Saving, yes, save often. I've lost a lot of time having my computer crash for lots of different reasons. I've lost hours and hours, and sometimes a complete file, because I did not save enough. Yeah, so right now I'm just adding a little bit of geometry to that back wall. Just playing around with maybe some planar shifts, using selections quite a bit too. But yeah, just playing around, seeing what works. Actually quite indecisive here. But yeah, because I don't want to create too much contrast that will compete with the contrast in the foreground. But yeah, enough contrast right now that I can select into it, and then airbrush in some lighter values to knock it back a little bit. Yeah, knocking it back quite a bit. Yeah, I'm trying to add a little bit of haze, so a little bit of a lighter value at the bottom, at the base, where it's meeting the ship, just to create a little bit of contrast there, to still pop out that left wing and the guns on that left wing. Yeah, it's starting to feel pretty nice. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is open up the cockpit because I was feeling like the ship was feeling a little disjointed from him, and it would make more sense if the cockpit was open since that's where he's going to be headed. And so yeah, I pretty much just selected in the shape because it's really easy with SketchUp with everything being really graphic to just make selections, or in this case, cutting out an object and pasting it again, in this case behind the ship, and opening it, and now just remodeling it so that it feels just designing it in space and making it feel like an old F-16 sort of fighter pilot cockpit. I think they were keying a lot of those old starships and starfighters from the 80s off of fighter jets from the same era. I think they're really, I mean, I would be inspired. I still am inspired by those fighter jets. They're really, really amazing. And just cleaning up some of the trimming. If you're really interested in designing like imaginary aircraft like this, I definitely recommend going to like a museum aircraft show. Definitely the some sort of place where you can see the ships in person. Whether if you can get a tour on an aircraft carrier, I would definitely recommend that, just so you can see these planes in person, sit in them. Definitely seeing the inside of the cockpits is really inspiring. Bring a camera, just shoot as much reference as you can, and try and absorb as much information from life before trying to design it from your imagination. Thinking that maybe there's a center console. I mean, there usually is a center console in every fighter jet. So just kind of cleaning and adding a little bit of modeling. Just it's quite subtle, but just adding a little hint at a console, and focusing on the geometry inside of that cockpit, making it a little more angular. Now I wanted to get rid of this little trim around the afterburners. I want to get a little bit more of that sort of kind of accentuate the teeth on that. I kind of liked how that looked in silhouette, so that's what I'm doing here. All these subtle little tweaks definitely add up in the end. Yeah, I would definitely recommend working on a lot of different layers and organizing those layers. I know it can get a little confusing towards the end when you have like 100 layers piled up. So if you keep those organized, it just makes it easier and more efficient to refer back to later. But if you're trying to find a layer, um, a good way to do that is if there's something in your image that you're trying to paint on that layer. If you use your arrow cursor and you command or control click where you want to select, it should go to that layer. So for an example, like if I had these engines on a layer and I wanted to refer to that layer when I'm on another, just go to the arrow key on the top toolbar on the left and Command or Control click, and it should bring up that layer. Okay, the teeth are, it's getting there. Probably definitely feeling the tediousness at this point. Yeah. Okay, I definitely moved on from there. Now I'm playing with silhouette. Yeah, I was trying to see if changing the hall would do something interesting, but I guess not. I'm working in some subtle modeling. Some little fins to these guys. I think it would look kind of cool. Kind of like those missiles, like seeker missiles on fighter jets. He's missing a shadow. So I'm painting on a layer below the character, and I think it's going to get to a point where I'm going to realize that the shadows are wrong. Right now I'm trying to match the shadows to the plane shadow, but oh yeah, it's about at this point where I think I'm realizing that the sun, there it is, blinking that on and off. The sun, if it was over there, it would work, but it's placed behind the character, so those shadows are wrong. So now I'm drawing out some guides, um, just to describe how far off my shadows are. So now I select the character, I flip them upside down, and skewed him to fit a little bit more appropriately to where that sun's located. And even then, I think I'm cheating a little bit, where it's still suggesting that the sun is a little more to the right, but it feels directly below him. I think it'd be a little bit boring. So the fact that it's skewed just a little bit on that plane, I don't think is too big of a deal. But do it to the eye. You know, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it should look correct. If it looks wrong, then it's wrong. So now I'm changing the shadow underneath the ship. And I realize that I'm missing that left wing. So I think it's at this point where I'm opening up an older file on my other monitor. Oh, there it is. So now I'm using the ground shadow from that to skew and match, because like I said, I exported a couple different lighting situations, so this shadow is going to be a little bit more appropriate for where the sun's located. And I'm cleaning it up because every time you skew something, it's just a little bit off, so it requires just a little bit of love to get it to feel right. Suggesting those afterburners back there. Yeah, it's feeling better. Okay, so now that the shadows are in place, we're getting to the fun part, which is adding some of the lighting effects in the atmosphere. But first, I'm going to just add a few touches to the cockpit glass, um, getting it to feel a little bit more translucent. So I'm airbrushing in a little bit of that sky color into the glass to get it to feel more translucent. Yeah, it's feeling good. Okay, so now into lighting. So the color comp has some pretty harsh darks at the base of the composition, the closest to the camera, to really get that shadow and that contrast in there. I'm gonna apply looks like I'm applying an exposure layer, which is it's a lot like levels, but I actually like exposure a little bit better than levels because you get some more saturated lights and some saturated darks. So with exposure, within the exposure layer, I'm painting into the mask and getting some of that burn through on the ground plane, and now cleaning up the character to really get that bloom, that hot sort of sun effect around his torso and face, to get that burn through, keep him mysterious, and really key in that color and that hot area of contrast, because that's the focal point. The focal point of the composition is that character. So really getting that sense of heat in that area, that's really key. And this is the fun part. This is after you get all the shapes and the values somewhat feeling correct, then you can really play with some of those little areas of eye candy, essentially. Playing around with how hot and like how much of that bloom effect is going to affect his silhouette. And just like the shadows, I'm adding a lighter levels layer to the ground plane to really key up some of the highlights, give it a little bit of a more of a glossy finish to the ground plane. And again, with all these levels and exposure layers, I'm using a layer mask to paint out the darks and lights, and to expose what's underneath, and to really kind of it's really nice to have control over how much of the layer you want exposed. Maybe some of these little beams in the foreground are reflecting the sun as well. Keying back in some of the shadows. Okay, now I'm adding in some smoke effect to break up the space between the landing platform in the foreground to the buildings in the background. Um, Again, it's good just to add a little bit of moisture or some smoke, especially in hot environments like this. It really it intensifies the heat in this environment by just adding or hinting at smoke. And it also pops out like things in the foreground right now. It's really popping forward those the guns on the ship, and it's really making those buildings in the background recede. And playing around with the size of the sun. I think I like it big though. It's just it has better impact. Now I'm thinking that it'd be pretty cool to add a couple clouds to break up that gradient, which is a little bit boring. Just a couple clouds around the sun just adds a little bit. The ship's really popping forward now. It's starting to look nice. And these clouds are subtle, but they're reacting to the light from the sun. So it's almost just a little bit of rim light on those clouds. Pretty subtle. The more pronounced they would be, I think they would create too much contrast and detract away from the elements in the foreground. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of vacancy back there, a little bit of breath to break up the composition, because there's a lot going on in the foreground and the middle ground. Okay, blending some of those clouds a little bit more. Yeah, this is feeling nice. Gonna clean up that shadow a little bit, especially under those legs. Okay, so I'm thinking of adding a fuel pump. So I'm using the circle selection and a gradient. And from the center of the gradient, or the circle I should say, I'm using the path tool to draw a curved line. And what's going to happen is with the smudge tool, make sure the smudge tool is set to a round brush, a hard round brush, and that it's up to 100%. And within your paths menu, which I'm about to pull up right here, if you click on that little icon on the right, if you bring in stroke path, you'll be able to draw, it'll repeat the smudge all the way down the length of the line, and it'll look like a cylinder. So what I'm doing is I keep turning that on and looking at it, and then readjusting, and then turning it on and looking at it, and readjusting it a little bit until it feels right and it flows the eye well into the ship. And I'm pretty happy with this, I think. Yeah, that feels pretty good. Okay, saving. Okay, so now what's going to be important after I get it to get the perspective right, using warp, using perspective, but now getting the levels adjusted so that it fits in the environment. But yeah, try paths. Try using that and drawing out some hoses, or it's good for hoses or pipes. Even for beams, you can use it in different ways. It's quite useful. See, I'm playing with styles right now, and I'm looking at Emboss, which is under the filter menu. And Emboss is good for getting some pretty high contrast. And then now I'm going through the layer attributes, and I'm on linear light at the moment, and playing with the contrast right now and erasing out what I don't want. Still going through the layer attributes. Okay, it looks like this is now on a color layer. I added a color layer, I think, so that instead of keying it red, I'm keying off of more of the browns that are on those jet engines. Getting a little point of highlight, just picking one, and I'm picking it where the shadows are, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of counterintuitive, but there's little interesting things that happen like that in an environment depending on where shapes are positioned. It's nice, it makes it stand out just in one area. Now I'm adding some ribbing just for just a little added surface detail. Especially in that area, it's going to really pop out, even though I'm going to continue it down the length of the hose. Hope he remembers to detach that before flying off. Okay, yeah, that's feeling nice. Okay, now I'm just adding some accents. Some wiring just to break up those forms a little bit more. Yeah, the rim around the glass was feeling a little soft, so I used stroke around a selection to just define the edges a little darker at the bottom, and then erased out what I didn't want. Clean up the shape a little bit. Cool. We're almost there. Just adding some greebles to these to the engine details. Just breaks up the forms a little bit more. Again, you just want the initial read to be the big shapes, and then all these little accents at the end are just a way to really pick up those large forms, just break them up, and it makes it feel a lot more believable. got rid of some of those wiring down there. Wasn't quite sure why there'd be random wires at the bottom of the hull. Adding some accent shapes to the area, the rear of the ship. The central computer, maybe. Playing with this radiator or intercooler. Not quite sure what that is, but it's definitely to cool off the ship. This thing probably gets hot, especially in this environment. So I was thinking it should probably be a little bit bigger. So I'm using the warp tool here to get it to look like it's rounding around the form and adding a little bit of a shadow at the bottom. It's always in these little details that I feel the most indecisive, actually. It's like, is this helping the overall design? Sometimes I'll put something in and I'll be like, yeah, that feels good. And then I'll go back, or I'll go get a bite to eat or something and come back, maybe not even just 30 minutes later, and I'll be like, oh, that looks like crap. And then I'll erase it, try something else. It's part of the process, I guess. It's always good to look at your image with fresh eyes too. Sometimes you'll do something rather quickly, or you'll do it in a day. You'll wake up the next morning, you'll look at your image again, and you'll just hate it. And I guess it's finding a balance, like, trying to see why you liked it maybe the day before and not the next day. Sometimes you might not even know why, but you'll know that you'll want to change it. And hopefully it'll look better in the end. Usually it does. And if you're not sure, ask a friend or ask somebody online. Don't be afraid to get critiques of your work. It can only make your work better. Now I'm just adding some details to the cockpit. I'm thinking that there should be maybe some way that you can open the cockpit manually, just in case the electronics fail. It'd be good that you have a manual release system on that cockpit. Still playing with accents. Now I want some sort of wiring down at the base near the hull. I'm trying to create something interesting. There's a catching system on aircraft carriers for fighter jets. I'm not sure if they still use that. I'm pretty sure they don't. Everything's electronic now, but they definitely use that with the F-14 Tomcats. They had this hook that helped stop the ship, so they landed on the runway and came to a stop instead of going right off and on the other side into the ocean. And it was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool shape. Definitely doesn't serve the same purpose in this image, but some sort of wires, if it's some sort of hydraulic system, not quite sure, but it just adds a cool silhouette. Now I'm feeling like the spine of the ship's feeling a little bland, so I'm playing around with how to make it a little bit more interesting, creating some sort of ventilation, playing around with what that might look like. Now I'm going back to my color palette and I picked some colors for the objects. I color picked from some sunset images from aircraft carriers, and I found that there's some neutral, almost purely gray, cool rim light that would react to the ships and those color schemes. So I'm adding a little bit of rim light, using those cools. Um, just to have the form round, even just a little bit. There's something about backlit images that's I've always been attracted to. Not quite sure what it is. Okay, now I'm throwing on the gray on literally right on the engine, and I use those the layer sliders like I was describing earlier to split those to get some of the darks of to show through on the underneath layer. And now I'm erasing out and painting in some highlights with that cool gray color. It's really making it pop and round a little bit more. It was flattening out a little bit too much earlier. Adding some nicks and scratches. All those little details will just make it feel used, you know? Yeah, adding it on the end of the wing. Just in little areas, you don't have to go too overboard. Just adding a couple of highlights at the rear gun. And that transition needs a little bit of modeling. Adding a little bit of harsher rim light towards the end of um, the end of the engine on top of the wing, just to get those areas to pop out a little bit. Working small, still focusing on the big reads, making sure that there isn't unnecessary contrast to detract away from the areas that are the most important. Knocking back a little bit of the contrast in the cockpit area. Yeah, it's feeling right. Getting a little bounce light under the underbelly. bounce light's great. If something's not feeling like it's sitting in the environment, always just try and add a little bit of bounce light um, to just have it react to the environment a little bit more. Adding just a little greeble. Sometimes one's all you need, to break up a large form. Because there's a lot of concentrated detail on the ship, especially in the rear, that you don't want to add too much detail everywhere, or else it's just going to get too noisy. Um, just look at ships and vehicles that exist in reality, and they have a similar sort of design aesthetic where there's points and areas of high detail, and then where it's unnecessary, it'll just be completely plainer. But I'm still adding just little accents like paneling to the spine of this ship, just to break up those forms a little bit. And cleaning up the silhouette a little bit. Yeah, we're getting there. It's almost there. Okay, so I felt like the plane of the runway needed some sort of little accent, so I added a little bit of a railing at the end here. Go through the layer attributes, trying to get that to feel right in the space. Yeah, knocking it back so it doesn't compete with the ship. There's a lot of contrast there. So yeah, definitely lightening it up and having some of that smoke play with the railing as it recedes in space. So the building on the left, I feel like it's adding a little too much contrast. So I'm darkening the sky over there just so that it kind of bleeds into the environment a little bit more. Because I want to keep the key focus and the key contrast around the ship and the character, the pilot. So I was thinking that there might be some vents, or maybe the engines are steaming a bit, like he has it running. But I decided against it. I thought that maybe it's not ready to go yet. It's only ready when he's in it. Adding more atmosphere to pop out that ship even more. So I was thinking that maybe there would be a little bit of a bloom as well on the ship. key that down, pulling the sliders and the layers. And again, just double click on the layer. That'll pull up that menu where you can play with the sliders. Adding a layer mask. I darkened it a little bit, but now I'm painting out some of the layer that's underneath, which is lighter. Adding a little bit of heat to the shadow, especially where it meets the lightest areas on the ground plane. So I was thinking that it was feeling a little bit vacant on the left side of the composition behind the ship, so I added a couple of shapes back there just to break up that area a little bit. Thinking maybe that they're repair stations or some sort of crates or something, just to break up the space between the ground plane and that building. Couple glints and little bits of shadow just in certain areas, just to add a little bit more noise to break up the uniformity. There's a decent bit of uniformity right now, so it's good to break up some of those shapes with, well, essentially smaller shapes. Okay, now I'm playing with the building in the background. I want to break that up. It's looking a little boring, so playing with repeating some of the elements and stretching and skewing them as a good basis to paint over. Adding some antennas. Yeah, it's getting there. Alright, what's that? Notice that there's a rogue brushstroke. Okay, there it goes. Sometimes I do that. I in a hurry and I'll make a stroke somewhere and I'm like, where is that? And like I mentioned before, you use that arrow key, push command or control, click, you'll find what layer it's on. Alright, that building's looking pretty cool now. So now I want to add some lights. So I have a repeat brush that I made. So essentially little squares with a little bit of a beveled edge on one side. And I just I just put the spacing up a little bit and it creates windows. It's pretty cool. So yeah, just kind of dusting those in right now. Just adds a little bit of life to the buildings. Still feeling like that's a little too dark, so I'm gonna try and knock that back a little bit. Adding some stronger highlights. A little less uniformly now, so not using the airbrush as much. Okay, now just adding a couple more greebles to the ship. Not trying to go overboard though. So you can see at the end here, I definitely do experiment a little bit and really tweak the lighting almost timidly. I just, that's where layers really come into play, where I'm making broad strokes at first and large selections, the big shapes. And now when we're getting into the refinement, it's figuring out where your focus is and what's working, what's not working, and tweaking a little bit until it feels right, adding some other areas, and then that might affect the other areas, and it's kind of a back and forth until you're finished. And then also adding in like more details, like right now I'm just adding another hose on maybe that oxygen backpack that the pilot has. But apparently the atmosphere is breathable. He's not wearing any sort of breathe assist on his or respirator on his face. Okay, we're getting pretty close here. Just adding a couple more touches, although it can never be done. You can just keep working on it and working on it until, well, it can look overworked, I guess, but always a signature is a good way to tell yourself that it's nearing its completion or complete. So yeah, at this point when I'm starting to feel satisfied, like I want to add a film grain, so I go to filter noise and I add, anywhere between 4 to 7% noise, as you can see when I zoom in. So it gives it kind of a grainy cinematic quality, which is always nice. And then you can knock it back. You can have it not show up in the shadows if you use the layer attributes. Okay, so this is our final illustration. So I did a couple more things. First off, let's see, let me take these down a bit. Very subtle, these are subtle. I did a brightness, contrast, and exposure layer just to pop out some of the lighting a little bit more. You could see the subtle differences and changes, especially in this area. They're very subtle little tweaks, but yeah, adds just a little bit, and then hazed back the buildings a little bit more. And then I added a sharpen layer, which if you zoom in, you could see, and I knocked it back a little bit. I knocked it back to 60%, but when it reacts to the film grain, it adds this weird little texture there, which is kind of nice. Gives it sort of a photographic quality. But yeah, this is the illustration. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned something from it. And if you have any questions, or if you want to let me know if you like the tutorial, you can always email me. My email is bmattias. It's B M as in Matt, A T as in Tom, YAS 1 @gmail.com. Thanks for watching.